You are staring again, human. Ethan Cole didn't flinch at the accusation. He had nothing else to do in this cold, dimly lit cell but stare at the alien woman sitting across from him. Saria, warrior princess of the Xelari, met his gaze with those eerie, luminous violet eyes, sharp as daggers, but something flickered behind them. Not anger. Not yet. Can you blame me? Ethan leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. I've never been locked up with royalty before, Saria scoffed, stretching her long, claw-tipped fingers. Former royalty. My title means nothing now. Just as your diplomat badge won't save you here. Ethan smirked, though the knot in his stomach tightened. So we're both nobodies. Her gaze flicked to him, unreadable. Not nobodies. Pawns. She wasn't wrong. The Xelari Empire had captured Ethan during what was supposed to be a peace negotiation. He'd walked into the meeting with carefully crafted words, a translator device, and blind hope. Now, he was stuck in a prison cell, accused of espionage. And his only company? A fallen alien warrior who looked like she could snap his neck if she got bored enough. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. The cell was barely big enough for the two of them. A cot on either side, a single dim overhead light, and a force field door that hummed ominously, reminding them of their captivity. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first, a warmth, deep in Ethan's chest, blooming like a flickering ember. He frowned, shifting uncomfortably. Across from him, Saria's breathing hitched. Her claws flexed, digging into her thighs. She looked unsettled. What? Ethan's voice came out rough. His throat was dry, his skin prickling with heat. What is this? Saria's eyes widened. Her posture stiffened, her breath shallow. Then, her expression twisted into something close to horror. No. No. She pressed a hand against her chest as if trying to suppress something. This can't be happening. Ethan swallowed, trying to push down the strange, growing heat coiling in his gut. It wasn't pain, but it was something powerful, something dangerous. Saria stood abruptly, fists clenched. You need to get as far away from me as possible. Ethan arched a brow. We're in a 6x8 cell, princess. Where exactly do you want me to go? Her jaw tightened, frustration warring with something else on her face, something close to panic. This is the burning, she said through gritted teeth. And it should not be happening with a human. Ethan felt the heat intensify, crawling under his skin like liquid fire. His pulse pounded in his ears, his breath shallow. Whatever this burning was, it was real. And it was tearing through him like an unseen force, binding itself to something deep inside him. Saria looked just as affected, but she was fighting it harder. Her claws dug into her palms, sharp teeth clenched in a tight grimace. She paced the small space, her every muscle coiled like she was preparing to attack something, or herself. You're going to explain, Ethan ground out, his voice hoarse. Right now. Saria turned on him, her eyes glowing brighter. You don't want the explanation, human. You want this to stop. He exhaled sharply. You're right. So tell me how. She laughed, bitter and sharp. If I knew how to stop the burning, I wouldn't be in this situation. Ethan ran a hand through his damp hair. So what is it? Saria hesitated, as if saying the words aloud would make it worse. But there was no escaping it now. She exhaled slowly, struggling against whatever force was gripping both of them. It's a bond, she said finally. A biological reaction only my kind should experience. It's supposed to connect warriors of the same bloodline, tying them together in an unbreakable link. She shook her head. But you're not Xelari. This is impossible. Ethan let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. Well, clearly, it's possible. Because I feel like I'm burning alive. Saria's gaze darkened. It gets worse. Of course it does. Ethan braced himself as the heat spread, curling around his spine, sinking deep into his chest. His vision blurred for a second, the world narrowing until all he could focus on was Saria. She was standing still now, her breathing ragged, her pupils dilated. He could feel her, not just see her or hear her, but feel her. Her frustration, her fear, her struggle. It was leaking into him, foreign but unmistakably real. His throat went dry. Tell me this isn't some kind of... It's not mating, human, Saria snapped, then immediately looked away, her jaw tight. It's worse. It's a connection that can't be severed. Not without consequences. Ethan didn't like the way she said that. What kind of consequences? Her silence stretched too long. Saria, he pressed. She finally met his gaze, and something in her expression made his stomach twist. If the burning isn't completed, she said slowly, it destroys both hosts. The air in the cell grew impossibly heavier. Ethan stared at her, searching for any sign that she was exaggerating, but there was none. He had been a hostage for less than 24 hours, and now he was somehow biologically tied to an alien warrior whose species barely tolerated humans. And if they didn't fix whatever was happening, they were both dead. Well, Ethan muttered, rubbing a hand down his face, this just keeps getting better. Saria was still watching him, and he swore he could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against his. We need to find a way out of here, she said, her voice sharp, determined. Because if we don't, we won't just be prisoners. We'll be corpses. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Great. So, how do we escape an impenetrable Xelari prison while resisting some kind of alien bond that wants to fuse us together? Saria's lips twitched, the barest hint of amusement flashing in her eyes. You're surprisingly calm about all of this. Oh, I'm panicking internally, Ethan said flatly. But I figure my odds of survival go up if I keep my head on straight. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then let's get to work. Their cell was nothing special. Reinforced walls, energy barriers in place of doors, and surveillance orbs hovering in the corners. Ethan had seen enough Xelari tech to know that brute force wouldn't get them out. Saria was already moving, running her fingers along the force field's edges, testing for weak spots. Ethan tried not to focus on the way her movements sent sharp waves of awareness through his bloodstream, the burning making him hyper-aware of her presence. How well do you know Xelari systems? Saria asked without looking back. Well enough to know they don't like me messing with them, Ethan replied. What's your plan? Find a flaw. She pressed her palm against a small panel embedded in the wall. The lights flickered briefly. Every system has one. Ethan stepped closer, glancing at the panel. If we trip something, won't they just gas the cell and drag us to an even worse situation? Saria flashed him a sharp grin. That's why we have to trip the right thing. He had to admit, he liked the way she thought. The burning pulsed again, an electric sensation curling through his limbs, but he pushed it aside. They had bigger problems, like breaking out of an alien prison before their own bodies betrayed them. And somehow, Ethan had a feeling this was just the beginning. Ethan kept his breathing steady, but every second that passed, the burning dug deeper, clawing at the edges of his mind. He could feel Saria's presence, not just see her, not just hear her, but something deeper, more primal, woven into his very existence. It should have terrified him. Instead, it only made the need to escape more urgent. Saria worked fast, her fingers dancing over the small panel in the wall, her expression sharp with concentration. The flickering light above them dimmed slightly, the force field humming with an almost imperceptible shift. There, she muttered. I found the relay. Ethan leaned in, instinctively keeping his voice low. And that means what? It means I can overload it. She tilted her head toward him, violet eyes gleaming. But it's going to attract attention. He exhaled sharply. Then we better be ready. The pulse of the burning surged between them, a phantom heat curling under his skin. For a moment, the air felt too thick, every sound too sharp. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. On my mark, Saria whispered. She pressed her fingers against the relay, claws clicking lightly against the metal. A spark jumped between her skin and the panel, and the lights flickered wildly. The force field wavered, its hum becoming erratic. Then, alarms. A shrill, piercing sound filled the air, and the force field collapsed in a burst of white-hot light. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Saria's wrist as they bolted into the corridor. The prison was a maze of metal and shadow, endless halls stretching in every direction. Doors lined both sides, some with screaming prisoners, others silent as the grave. This way, Saria snapped, dragging him toward a junction. We need weapons. No argument there. They rounded a corner just as two Xelari guards appeared, their sleek black armor reflecting the dim emergency lights. Their elongated heads snapped toward them, sharp mandibles clicking as they raised their weapons. Ethan moved on instinct. He dropped low, sweeping one guard's legs out from under him while Saria surged forward, her claws slashing across the second guard's throat. The alien gurgled, collapsing against the wall. Ethan snatched up a fallen rifle, spinning it in his hands as the first guard struggled to rise. Without thinking, he brought the butt of the weapon down on its head, sending it sprawling unconscious. Saria arched a brow. Efficient. He smirked. I try. They stripped the guards quickly, arming themselves before sprinting down another corridor. The alarms continued to blare, red lights flashing overhead. Where's the exit? Ethan asked between breaths. There's a hangar bay on the lower level, Saria replied. But we'll never make it there without being seen. Ethan's mind raced. They needed a distraction. Something big enough to draw every guard in the complex away from their route. Then an idea hit him. How much damage do you think we can do to the reactor? Saria blinked, then grinned, sharp and predatory. Now that is an idea. They turned down another corridor, moving faster now. The burning still throbbed between them, but in a way, it was almost fueling them, driving them forward, keeping them in sync. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were about to burn this entire place to the ground. They ran, their footfalls a perfect rhythm against the cold metallic floors of the prison. The alarms screamed overhead, casting a crimson glow over everything. The burning was still there, curling around Ethan's mind, binding him to Saria in ways he didn't understand. He wasn't sure if it was helping or making everything worse. Saria moved like a predator, fast, precise, deadly. He kept pace with her, his stolen rifle gripped tight. The corridor twisted, leading deeper into the facility, toward the reactor. If they could overload it, the entire prison would be forced into emergency mode, drawing every guard away from the hangar bay. Through here, Saria hissed, skidding to a stop near a reinforced door. She tapped on the control panel, her claws clicking impatiently. Damn it. Locked. Ethan slung the rifle over his shoulder and knelt beside the panel. Give me a second. Saria narrowed her eyes. You can hack Xelari tech? Diplomat, he reminded her, prying off the cover and exposing the glowing circuits. I had to learn a few tricks in case negotiations went south. She huffed, glancing down the corridor as distant voices and heavy boots thundered toward them. They're coming. I'm working on it. He pulled a thin wire from the panel and twisted it, causing the lights on the screen to flicker. The lock gave a soft click, and the door hissed open. Saria grabbed his wrist and yanked him inside, just as plasma fire ricocheted off the wall where they had been standing. The door sealed behind them. Ethan exhaled sharply. That was close. Saria didn't reply. She was already moving, scanning the reactor room. It was massive. Rows of towering energy cores pulsed with bright blue light, humming with raw power. We overload even one of these. The whole station goes into lockdown, she said. Ethan stepped forward. Then let's do it. Saria worked quickly, bypassing the security measures with an efficiency that told him she'd done this before. He followed her lead, rerouting energy flows and disabling safety protocols. The cores pulsed erratically, their hum turning into an unstable whine. A robotic voice crackled to life over the speakers. Warning. Reactor core destabilizing. Evacuation protocol engaged. The entire prison shuddered, lights flickering as emergency sirens replaced the alarms. Saria grinned. That should do it. They bolted from the room, moving against the flood of panicked guards rushing to contain the situation. No one even looked twice at them. Every Xelari was too focused on stopping the impending catastrophe. The hangar bay was close now. Ethan could almost taste freedom. But just as they reached the final corridor, a towering figure stepped into their path. High Commander Varek. His armor gleamed under the red emergency lights, his obsidian black eyes locking onto them with an amused tilt of his head. I should have known you wouldn't break so easily, Saria, he mused. His voice was smooth, almost amused. Saria's muscles tensed beside Ethan. "Get out of our way, Varek." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think so." Ethan lifted his rifle, but before he could fire, Varek moved with impossible speed, striking him hard in the chest. He hit the floor with a grunt, the weapon skidding out of his grip. Saria lunged, her claws flashing, but Varek caught her wrist mid-swipe. "You've become weak," he sneered, twisting her arm. She growled, using the momentum to kick him in the chest, forcing him back. Ethan scrambled to his feet, reaching for the second guard's discarded weapon. "Hey, ugly!" Varek turned just as Ethan fired. The plasma bolt hit the High Commander square in the chest, sending him staggering backward. Saria wasted no time. She leapt forward, driving her claws into his side. Varek let out a strangled growl, eyes widening as she twisted the blade deeper. Then, with a final, vicious snarl, she yanked it free. Varek slumped to the ground, his breath gurgling. His gaze flicked up to Saria, filled with something between rage and disbelief. "You will never be free," he rasped. Saria wiped the blood off her claws, her expression unreadable. "Watch me." They didn't wait to see him die. The hangar was just ahead. They sprinted toward it, slipping through the chaos as guards scrambled to evacuate. Saria spotted a sleek black cruiser near the bay doors and pointed. "That one." They climbed in, and Ethan wasted no time overriding the controls. Engines roared to life beneath them, and the ship lifted off the ground. Saria activated the hangar bay doors, and the stars stretched out before them, a vast, endless sky. Ethan pushed the thrusters forward. The cruiser shot out into the abyss, leaving the crumbling prison behind. For the first time since his capture, he breathed. Saria sat beside him, silent, staring at the endless void ahead. Ethan glanced at her. "So, what now?" She exhaled slowly, as if finally allowing herself to feel the weight of everything that had just happened. "We stopped them," she said. "All of them." Ethan raised a brow. "We just escaped an alien prison. You want to go back and fight an empire?" Saria turned to him, her eyes burning with something fierce. "They tried to break us," she said, "and they failed." The burning pulsed between them, no longer searing pain, but something else, something powerful. Ethan smirked. "Then let's make them regret it." Saria gave a sharp nod, and together, they disappeared into the void, two fugitives bound by an impossible connection, ready to set the universe on fire.